Good evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of Chelsea Waves. Today, we're going to provide our analysis of Saturday's decisive victory over Spurs in the London Derby before diving into some of the key talking points around this game. Our chosen topic of this week is going to be one that continues to spark debate amongst Chelsea fans, Enzo Fernandez. We're then going to switch our focus over to Azerbaijan with a mini preview of Wednesday's Champions League group stage fixture versus Qarabag, before finishing with a special guest appearance from Jon Gill, executive producer of The Rest is Football and Wolves fan, to preview Saturday night's late kickoff at the Bridge.
Yet another win at 3 Point Lane. That makes it 5-6 at the new Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. That one defeat being due to Graham Potter tax. What a performance. That game had absolutely everything, apart from maybe a couple more goals, if we're being greedy.
Indeed, George. And I recall around this time last week, we previewed the match alongside Toby, and I said comfortably that I would take a draw at the time. So I'm sat here feeling a little bit silly now, albeit relieved. Huge win, massive 3 points for us in the context of the season and our recent form, given the shock in that fixture versus Sunderland last week. I think there are still, not to focus on the negative too much, but there are still massive question marks off the back of this game. And to use your term, I think there is a degree of Tottenham tax at play here and the heritage around 3 Point Lane. I don't want to focus too much or dwell too much on this, but the point around profligacy up front, in particular, looking at chances that Joao Pedro, who did get on the score sheet with that critical and decisive goal in the first half, and also Jamie Gittins, who inexplicably blasted that shot over the bar when we should have just wrapped up the game there. Despite that, I think this was probably the most encouraging performance of the season in many ways. Defensively, continuing with the theme from last week, it was an entirely new partnership. I don't even think Chalobah and Fofana had played together in a back two this season once before. So we saw the lineup, and it was again met with shock and horror in my eyes because I don't really rate Fofana, but absolutely going to give him his flowers on this occasion. He really stepped up to the occasion and contributed to a massive, solid defensive display from Chelsea. I think the key stat that we discussed before this, George, was the point around Tottenham's expected goals at zero point 0.1, which is just absolutely astonishing. I know you're a big data man, so that one really caught your eye as well.
0.1, 0.05 I've seen. The key here being that is the lowest XG on record, well, recorded by Tottenham Hotspur. A mind-blowing statistic, particularly kind of at their home ground. You consider they were third in the league going into this game. I think you have to put that down to an element of Spursiness, as Toby kind of mentioned. Chelsea housery last week. You called it. Moises Caicedo finally getting his flowers, an absolute monster showing. We've known it for some time. Last year's Player of the Year for Chelsea. It feels like this year it's taken reductively goals and assists for the masses to kind of come to the terms with the levels he's providing week in, week out. Goals and assists and fantasy football points, if we're being honest. How good was he?
Absolutely fantastic. I always feel like we've seen, you know, him at the peak of his powers every week, and he takes it up one notch every time. I completely run out of superlatives to describe Caicedo, and I'm almost disappointed that all of these astonishing performances are met with comparisons to Declan Rice after each game, because in my eyes it's a non-context. I think I don't want to pivot to Rice here, but Caicedo's doing the job of maybe two or three midfielders, and Rice is basically just being pushed forward and being asked to, contribute to set pieces, to get on the end of things. Caicedo's doing absolutely everything, and I think that goal was almost the perfect metaphor or demonstration of just what he brings to this team. That absolute tenacity and chasing down lost causes. Pedro Neto, well, he won it initially from Jed Spence. Pedro Neto inexplicably passes the ball back to, I think it was Mickey van der Ven. Caicedo, I think the mentality of any normal midfielder or player in that situation would be to retreat and get back in your position. But he has this tenacity and this ambition to be on the front foot, and it really just sets the tone for the rest of the team. And on that occasion, it was such a perfect example of what he brings, and you know, laying it on a plate for Joao Pedro, who was struggling, but he couldn't miss that chance. And I think Jamie Carragher said it on the comms at the time, like Joao Pedro's put the ball in the back of the net, but that goal is all down to Moises Caicedo, who I think comfortably right now is the best midfielder in the world.
Absolutely. I mean, probably one of my favorite assists in recollection. You often think of great assists, potentially a Cruyff turn, a sensational pass, but it was just so kind of rare, so beautiful. Him winning the ball high, not once but twice. Jed Spence, and then the Spurs captain, Mickey van der Ven. I know you've called me a Sanchez apologist in kind of recent years, partly down to kind of years of suffering, Kepa and his T-Rex arms in net. But how good was he on Saturday?
There's a couple of performances over the last year or so where he's really stuck out and demonstrated what he's capable of, when he puts the blunders to one side and sharpens his focus in matches. And I think this was one of those that I would place alongside the Club World Cup final against PSG, where he was flawless, commanding his box unerringly this match, which I think was the most encouraging aspect of this. And I also want to touch on the next point around the long throws and how we combated that, because I think that really helped Sanchez's performance in terms of having that space to come and claim crosses. Talk us through this new strategy we implemented. I presume it's Bernardo Cueva who's our set piece coach.
I saw a line in the week from Sanchez himself that the team, the club, be it Maresca, be it Cueva, had kind of worked on defenders, kind of clearing a path for Sanchez to come and collect. It was absolutely phenomenal. Countless times. I actually think we conceded probably too many set pieces early days. I recall kind of a sloppy pass from Gusto. There was a tension around the game, quickly dispelled by Sanchez. It's a commandeering performance, coming out to claim countless crosses. I mean, it's rare you'd talk about the goalkeeper when you talk of a game with 0.05, 0.1 XG, but he was absolutely phenomenal. Distribution too, some of his long balls, finding Neto, finding Estevao when he came on, thought it was absolutely brilliant.
Indeed. And we don't need to go into too much detail, but did want to mention a couple of notable players from that game as well. Cucurella had the daunting task of locking down Mohamed Kudus, which he did expertly. There was one clip actually where he was almost explaining to Kudus what he can do better in the middle of the game, which is I've never seen before, but speaks to his character. And Malo Gusto, who we spoke about fleetingly in last week's podcast, saying actually that he turns up for these sort of big matches, and he's done it again. He really does rise to the occasion. But I think, as with the rest of the team, we simply have to build on this win now and take that momentum into, well, Wednesday night against Qarabag, but probably more importantly for now, Saturday night against Wolves to close out before the international break.
So we mentioned a couple of players beyond Moises. A final shout out goes to Enzo Jeremias Fernandez, who just so happens to be our topic for this week. It was much, much better from Enzo Fernandez at the weekend. Could easily have a couple of assists. We saw that beautiful bit of footwork, the little pass, the little cute pass to Garnacho that Carragher pointed out on comms. But ultimately, I believe that these performances have been too few and far between.
Agreed, George, and I'm starting to question myself and where I stand on this debate at the moment, because you and I both have been very strident in our view that Enzo Fernandez is simply not up to the task. But over the last maybe 6, 7 months, there has been a notable uptick in performance in a number of big games, twice against Spurs now, in fact, and I think it's worth having the debate at this stage as to sort of where we're at with Enzo and how good can he become in this team. I personally don't think he's ever going to justify that price tag of 105 million. It was crazy then. It remains crazy now. But is he finally starting to justify playing a critical role in our team and being a starter at last.
I think, as you say, there's been kind of permanent debate whether he's better deep, which we saw initially under Potter, or whether he's better in this kind of higher role, say, initiated by Pochettino, and surprisingly for most, kind of continued by Maresca. Um, I think he has qualities that can be on display in both those positions. But I think what is really clear to me and what's been crystallized with this last performance is he absolutely needs as a prerequisite a minimum of two other bodies in midfield. You have Reece James there on Saturday. I think back to some of his sort of best performances from recollection. I think about a great win against kind of Aston Villa last season, where you had him next to Lavia with Caicedo inverting.
Yeah.
And I think when you talk about his form for Argentina, the national team, World Cup winner, young player of the tournament, you're talking there about a box midfield. I think Argentina at the time played four. So you're looking three other players in that midfield position. We discussed kind of Caicedo finally getting his flowers. Palmer, everyone knows how good he is. Actually named in the kind of FIFA Pro 11 this week. So the players themselves deem him to be a World 11 player. Is it too kind of reductive to state that we should be, or historically should have been kind of dominating games? You've got two potentially world class, potentially world 11 players, and yet we were swallowed up at the Allianz, for example.
I totally agree. I still hold the view that he's a luxury player and he's in a very fortunate position of playing in a young squad that has legs and has a system in these big games where he's supported massively. You mentioned Reece James has been played in midfield to supplement alongside Caicedo. The Club World Cup final, we had, I think it was Gusto pushed into midfield as well, alongside Caicedo. I don't want to be so obsessed in this episode about Moises Caicedo, but I still get the feeling he's doing the job of two men in the middle of the park and with his pressing in these games naturally, Enzo Fernandez with his, technical quality is going to come up with moments, and there were some great passes. One in particular in the first half where I think he took the quick free kick and put Pedro Neto in almost in behind Jed Spence. So there is an improvement, but I think we have to continue asking the question if there was someone better in that number 10 role, would the output outstrip Enzo Fernandez? Is this the best we can do? I can't see him being taken out of the team anytime soon. So I think we're almost in a position we've got to make it work.
Let's play kind of devil's advocate here. Kind of continually you see on Twitter praise. He, for me, kind of epitomizes sort of transfer FC, that big Fabrizio fueled gas. To my mind, there's this kind of army of bots on Twitter singing his praises, but clearly there is a big contingent of people who do either buy into this or genuinely believe he's a top player. We constantly see, stats presented, very colourful stats, great GNA, progressive passes. I think one of our mates recently showed us kind of a squawk of comparison with Declan Rice. Look, his kind of dual contestation, his dual success is at parity. He's creating far more. He might not be as dangerous from set pieces, but his numbers, there's a lot of green in that visual compared to Declan Rice.
Are we wrong, George? Are we just in an echo chamber here? Is he this fantastic super gnome that we metronomic player that we constantly hear about on Twitter that we often are in opposition to?
Let's talk about that kind of Rice comparison. Ultimately, for me, Declan Rice had been in that team these past few years, we would not have seen these humbling losses. We're talking 5-0 against Arsenal. A couple of seasons back, we held 4 goals against Liverpool. Fine, top team. Newcastle, okay, intimidating St James's. We held 4 to Manchester United. Loads of goals to Wolves. Even our best showings, obviously Parma, PSG. Again, we had 2 others in midfield. But some of our best showings under Pochettino, you had 4-4 against Man City, 4-3 against Man United. Phenomenal end-to-end games. My whole idea of Enzo Fernandez joining Chelsea was that we'd see this kind of element of control. I was expecting kind of dictation from deep. Xabi Alonso, Cesc Fabregas. Even kind of more recently, a modern player. I watched Pedri at St James's Park absolutely toy with Guimaraes and Tonali. And for me, he's just not at that level. Is it too reductive? Palmer, Caicedo smashing it 8s, 9s, 10 out of 10s week in, week out. And yet we're not dominating these games. I think we've went 20 odd attempts without beating Liverpool, City, or Arsenal prior to beating Liverpool in that dead rubber game after they won the league last year. We still have not won a Premier League away game at those sides with Enzo Fernandez in the team.
Am I watching the games correctly at the moment, George, whereby Enzo has just been pushed entirely to that sort of central attacking midfielder position behind the striker, effectively? I had a debate with one of those bots on Twitter that you mentioned just now. Uh, Told me I was an idiot for claiming that Enzo was currently playing in that cam position, but it's all I can see. And I speak with my brother about this often. It feels like he's landed on that position. Maybe this is too cynical because it is the role in which he can do the least damage to Chelsea. We know he's a liability playing deep in midfield. He gets run past for fun. He's not capable of playing in sort of that pivot, right centre mid, left centre mid. We've seen him fleetingly at times. This feels like his destination based on some of those physical limitations that he's got.
I think that's a great call out. I would again challenge people at Opta, Squawka, etc. I'd love to see a heat map of Enzo Fernandez over a kind of sustained period of time. Often, as you say, people kind of prop these stats up, comparing him against your Rices, your Caicedos, your Guimaraes, etc. Is he not playing as a 10? Should he not be compared to players higher up the pitch, let alone talk about the kind of share of those goals, assists that came in the Conference League? A hat-trick of assists against Noah FC. Recently, in Palmer's absence, he's been on penalties. He's been on set pieces. Is he really playing much higher than Mason Mount did for Chelsea? We're going to leave it out there for you guys to answer that question.
Love to hear your thoughts. It's a controversial topic as ever, but we're all behind him and ultimately want the best for Chelsea.
Just a final kind of comment for me. Again, we've seen improvement recent times. We all want the best for Chelsea FC. We want to see Enzo really kicking on and being that £100 million player with output similar to Caicedo. But just one final point that potentially even feeds into mine, maybe your bias as well. I look back to Enzo being granted that vice captaincy. This was kind of far before we'd even seen remotely a kind of body of work, a body of strong performances. But the critical point here for me was that he was thrown that vice captaincy in the wake of that racism scandal, that Argentina national team chanting about the French rivals in that final, and ultimately dragging our club through the mud, all kind of promoting, propping this preconceived idea of Enzo Fernandez as the poster boy for Chelsea.
We'll keep this debate alive, but thank you very much, George, for sharing your thoughts there. So, George, attention turns temporarily over to Azerbaijan and another fixture in this lengthy Champions League group stage against Qarabag, who I think a lot of the commentary around this game is not paying due respect to Qarabag. They've got an identical record to us in the group stage so far with 2 wins and a loss. They sit on sort of the periphery of that top 8 that everyone is aiming for. How do you think we approach this one? Because there is obviously a inherent need to rotate, and the expectation would be pivot towards that sort of B team that we saw away at Wolves in the Carabao Cup last week. Again, we need to balance that against what I see as the indispensable need to get 3 points here, given some of the fixtures we've got coming up in the Champions League. I think it's Barcelona next before we got away matches against Napoli and Atlanta. How do you think we approach this one?
It's an interesting question, as you say. I've heard kind of takes, given this game is kind of 3,000 miles away, halfway across the world, should we even take half of our core players? I think this kind of speaks volumes to this new Champions League format. Probably a topic for another day. But realistically, yes, we want 3 points here to kind of ease our kind of fixture load going forward. This whole kind of talk about managing games. But as you say, Qarabag, I think 2 wins out of 3, won their first 2 games. It's not going to be easy. What are you predicting in terms of 11?
I am seeing a reversion to our what I would call probably a settled B team at this point. Obviously, there's a couple of changes with our sort of first team that we field in the Premier League. But I'm very much expecting, regrettably, Jorgensen to go back in the net. I would expect to see a defence comprised of probably Malagusto at right back with Achiampong, Tosin, and definitely Hato at left back. Midfield, I'd very much expect to see Lavia in that pivot alongside Santos, maybe with Gusto pushing forward to support them as a two, because it's not been brilliant so far in the games we've seen, in particular that first half against Nottingham Forest and obviously that second half, which was so chaotic against Wolves last week. Up front, I'm almost certain we're going to see Gittins and Esteval, although Esteval's one yellow away from missing Barcelona, so he definitely needs to err on the side of caution there. Up front, I am unsure whether we're going to see Mark Guiu get another chance, or is this Delap's opportunity to stake a claim to be in our starting 11 now that he's back fit and available?
There's an interesting omission there. Leads nicely into my prediction. I'm going for a Tyreek George goal in the Chelsea, both teams to score a win. I'm going to say 2-1 Chelsea. Tyreek George to continue his, quite frankly, sensational goal and assist return. I know we both are divided on the 19-year-old, the young man's prospects, but that's my call.
Yeah, I think the fact that I didn't even consider or mention him there speaks volumes of where I see George in the short term and long term future of Chelsea. But I do have to give him his due praise for his return so far. I still wouldn't be starting him. I think he'll be gone. I've seen rumours of him going to Crystal Palace in January, so I wouldn't invest too many stocks in Tyreek George at Chelsea. But I'm getting behind him, and I would absolutely love for him to prove me wrong and come back with a goal and assist in this match.
I think we agree there. Let's have a final prediction.
I am going to go for another chaotic fixture here. I'm going to say 3-2 to Chelsea.
Time now for the opposition view. Wolves at home, Saturday 8 p.m. kickoff. We are very excited to welcome this week's guest, Jon Gill, Wolves fan and producer of The Rest is Football, the biggest football podcast out there. Welcome, Jon.
Hey guys, lovely to be here. Thank you very much. I'm not sure how excited I am to be talking about Wolves right at the moment, if I'm entirely honest, but lovely to catch up with you guys, and I'm sure we'll have some fun.
Thank you so much for joining us, mate. Let's kick it off. How are we feeling, Wolves fan chaos at the minute?
Well, that's a question that could have quite a long answer, so I'll try and keep it quite brief. Pretty miserable, to be honest. I think there's a slight feeling of optimism now that happened over the last few days with obviously the sacking of Pereira, because it got on so rotten. I don't particularly blame him for that in too much detail. There's obviously so much going on behind the scenes, and the ownership is the big issue, really. The managers aren't doing well, and Pereira had to go, but things aren't going to change properly until the ownership changes. So, yeah, whilst it was a sorry situation with him, and it had become untenable over the last few weeks, I think that means there's a little bit more optimism around at the moment because we've kind of broken that cycle. But still, overall, it's a pretty miserable situation for us fans at the minute.
Can you let us know a bit about the current ownership of Wolves? Because I'll admit I haven't kept close tabs on it over the last sort of 5 years or so. I know that there was some initial Chinese investment in the club and grand designs. We also saw the influence of Jorge Mendes, which I think is still a feature for Wolves. But it'd be great just to understand, I guess, who's currently running the operation behind the scenes.
Yeah, it is, and Mendes is very much still involved. He's actually involved with the ownership all around as well. So he's very much his tentacles are still firmly wrapped around everything. So yeah, it's a Chinese company called Fosun, and from the Wolves perspective, headed up by Jeff Shi, took over a number of years ago, and it unfortunately it's a story we're seeing more and more in the football world, right? Where there was lots of optimism at the start, but I think a lot of Wolves fans are also quite cautious. There's money being pumped in, and obviously we got the promotion and things were going well in the Nuno. into Europe, but it kind of always felt like at some point the Wolves were going to come crashing down, and that's what we've seen over the last few years. And I think that's really the key point to get across here from a kind of Wolves perspective, is this has been happening for a few years now. This isn't a sudden thing where, we've had a bad season this season and that's it. We've been in decline for a few years. And that's been selling players, not replacing players properly. And effectively, in terms of the ownership that you're talking about, just the kind of investment has completely pulled back. And to be honest, it feels like the interest there has completely gone. Fosun are a huge company with huge amounts of money, and it feels like this is kind of a side piece for them that they're just no longer bothered by and just letting drift.
It's interesting you say kind of Pereira's position untenable, and there's kind of been increasing optimism with his departure. My kind of recollection, sort of an outsider take, was that the kind of fans were very sort of ingratiated with Pereira. There's all those kind of viral footage of him in Wetherspoons in Wolves. Fans loved him. Heroic efforts last year staying up. How has that fallen apart so quickly?
Yeah, that is something that's happened quickly. It's a really good point. Yeah, you're right. He was, coined that catchphrase, first the points, then the pints, and he was going out. I mean, I was in one of the bars with him after one of the games. You're right in town, and there was this huge optimism. We won 6 games in a row at the end of last season, and everything was going swimmingly. And then I think, again, it's all kind of ultimately stemmed a bit from the summer and the lack of investment, selling the best players. I mean, Cunha and Aït-Nouri leave, and you don't really replace them. When you're a team that are already struggling, that's going to leave a massive hole, right? So he's, over the course of that, just got worse and worse. And then the fractious relationship happens quite quickly, right? Where the fans start to turn, results aren't going. He's made some quite interesting team decisions over the last few weeks in terms of selection, which I think is where it's really then between him and the fans started to grate. He's been dropping Andre and João Gomes from the central midfield, the 2 Brazilian lads that are great players and fans have got confused about. He's been obsessed with Menezes, who most Wolves fans think is limited. He's basically a runner and an athlete, but not very good on the ball and not offering as much creativity. And he kind of said that in the summer as well, that he wanted big, tall, strong, fast athletes as his players. So I think that's where the link with him turned and got quite sour. And again, he's an emotional person, the way that he was loving life and out with the fans in the pubs last season very quickly turned to confronting the South Bank a couple of weeks ago. And I think as soon as that happened, there's no coming back from that, right?
Yeah, that all makes sense. From the outside looking in, Wolves, from a Chelsea perspective anyway, were very much a bogey team of ours for a long time, really. I remember a number of painful late winners from the likes of Pedro Neto, Podence, Mario Lemina after the last few seasons. And it feels like there's been a real step change since, if I'm correct in saying, summer 2023, when the likes of Ruben Neves, followed by Pedro Neto, and now Aït-Nouri and Cunha have all departed for big money and not been replaced. Is that probably a correct reading of the situation?
Absolutely spot on. That was the big turning point. So that summer, or 23, 24, at the end of that, we let Neves, Mateus Nunes, Conor Cody, Nathan Collins, Raul Jimenez, and João Moutinho all left the club. Like, that's a huge summer, right? That was the backbone of where we've been so successful, and didn't really invest that well in that. What we've done recently is basically not invest in the summer, start poorly, panic, then spend quite a bit in January to kind of put a plaster on it for 6 months, stay up, and then the cycle just starts again. So then the following year, we sold Neto and Max Kilman, Daniel Podence and Lemina left, players as well that you mentioned just there. And then this season, Cunha, Aït-Nouri, Sarabia, Semedo as well as another big one. So actually at the core of that, which I think a lot of people or doesn't get spoken about enough, is we're losing our star players, the Netos, the Cunhas, the kind of players that make the difference and kind of win you games. But also over that 3-year period, we've sold or let go, got rid of our last 5 club captains. I mean, that's bonkers, right? Just anything about that would tell you that that's not a sustainable model. And you look at the squad now, and there is no leadership. There is no one that you say, right, well, who is the person that's going to drag us through this, and who's going to say this isn't good enough and we need to be better, or batten down the hatches when it's not going well and dig in. And we have this group of for our leadership group of 4 players apparently this season, and I don't think any of them have done an interview post-match or pre-match or anything over the last 4 weeks or something like that. So again, it's a club devoid of their best players over the last few years, but also devoid of any leadership and any kind of continuation of that.
There's definitely kind of parallels there with Chelsea. We sort of mentioned that last week, that sort of opposition fans constantly questioning, unaware of some of the players in our lineup. I think we mentioned Champong, Hato. I'd say Wolves are actually one of the few sides that are even lesser known. Just on kind of Chelsea, always interested in hearing sort of the opposition view on us. What are your thoughts on, should we say, the lesser circus that is Chelsea FC in 2025?
Yeah, it's not often as Chelsea you get to say the lesser circus at Chelsea, is it? So you can revel in that today. I think it feels like from the outside that things are finally starting to turn the right way for you, and that some of the recruitment has been a bit better. It seems a bit more stable, and yeah, you're starting to fill gaps that you needed to fill, not just buying 37 wingers that all seem to be quite similar players and all in their own right are quite good, but there's again just no kind of continuity to that. I mean, Caicedo's obviously massively come to the fore. Getting João Pedro and Delap as kind of options up front were key, and yeah, it feels like things are starting to stabilise. We, funnily enough, with the Rest is Football that you mentioned earlier, covered the Club World Cup in quite a bit of detail in the summer, and Chelsea were very impressive there. And it felt again like there are steps being taken, and you know, I don't know how you guys felt, but when Maresca came in, me personally thought that's not going to end well. Like none of that felt like that was going to be a sensible move. Like that was another recipe for disaster. And complete credit to him. He's obviously kind of pushed away and tried to trim down the squad where he needed to and done well. And you can see now there's a bit more. It feels like there's stability at the club, even if that's not necessarily on the pitch with the starting lineup each time, because I know there's a lot of changes going on and there's a lot of injuries. But it feels like a club's just again gradually starting to turn the corner and move in that right direction.
Brilliant. Time for predictions. So how is this game going to play out and what is the final score?
Not well would be my prediction from my point of view. I think, look, I mean, we don't have to talk about stats with Wolves and how poorly they've been doing recently. That's everybody knows that. And it's always going to be a tough game for us against Chelsea. The one danger, I think, from a Chelsea point of view that you have is that we're now a little bit more unpredictable. Not much more unpredictable, but a little bit more, because who knows what's going to, who knows who will be in charge come the game. Who knows how much maybe the players had down tools and tried to force Pereira out towards the end. We might see some rejuvenated players. I'm sure Andre and João Gomez will be back in the starting lineup and they'll have a point to prove. So there's an element where there might be a bit of a surprise from Wolves. That being said, I don't think the surprise is going to go that far. I think it will be 3-0, 3-1 if I'm kind of hoping that we might get a goal even. But I think it'll be a fairly comfortable win for Chelsea, if I'm honest.
The new manager bounce is always the fear, and it often seems to happen with Chelsea. We got lucky against Nottingham Forest a couple of weeks ago in terms of having the opportunity to play Ange for one final time in the Nottingham Forest dugout, and we saw how that ended up. I would have been far less confident with Sean Dyche in place for that game, but I think it is just that question around unpredictability, and I think that is also compounded by the Qarabag Cup game last week, which we'd use the term circus. That probably feels like an apt description for that particular game and how that unfolded. I felt quite bad for Wolves and the fans there, because they were rearing the side on for the full duration of the game, despite being 3-0 down. Basically clawed yourself back almost to level terms and lost it late on. But I think it's a tricky one to call this Saturday. I'm going to go for 2-1 to Chelsea and a closer game than we think. I also like the look of the striker that played for you in that Carabao Cup game and scored the first goal. I think his name is Tolu Aradikare. He actually looked a very decent player, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him on the pitch and to get another goal against our leaky defence.
It is another really good point actually as well, because he's again someone that was brought in the summer and has hardly played any minutes really under Pereira. He's not really giving him a chance. He comes on with 5 minutes to go, 10 minutes to go, or that sort of thing. So again, could be someone that might get a go from the start and again have a point to prove, or at least gets on. We might play two up top with Strand Larsen. Who knows? Yeah, there's an element of unpredictability now which will make it harder. And the big other factor will be if we have a manager in place by the weekend, obviously, because there's still a few days out for that. Something could happen. I'd be surprised because it feels like they're not particularly close to anyone at the moment. But yeah, we'll see.
I'm very much hoping we've kind of learnt from our mistakes against Sunderland. 8 p.m. kickoff, no excuses for the fan base at Stamford Bridge to be absolutely rocking. I'm going to go for a sort of cautiously positive 2-0 Chelsea. But let's see. Thank you so much, Jon, for coming on the show. So really appreciate kind of your expertise, not only in terms of insight, but also on the tech. Hopefully this final section will be a little glimpse of what's to come for our podcast in terms of quality. Hopefully an easier listen for you listeners at home.
Thanks everybody for tuning in once again this week. We really hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we'll be back again next week with another one, reviewing this Saturday's fixture against Wolves to steer us all into the international break. As ever, please do like, comment and share and subscribe to the podcast, as it massively helps us to keep growing, and we'll catch you all next week.